In this second tutorial, we're going to go over the microanatomy of the three main areas within the lung. So you have the big main airways like the trachea and the bronchi, then you have the small bronchioles, and then you have the little alveoli. So if you start up in the trachea/bronchi, you have your respiratory epithelium, and it can be pseudostratified like in the trachea, or it can be like a simple columnar, which would be lower down in the bronchi. And pseudostratified, if you remember from Biocell 101, is that everything's touching this basement membrane, but the nuclei are on different levels. Now in both of these, there are goblet cells. So just put some in here. And these secrete mucus onto this top layer, which help trap things in the airways. Now in both of these, there are cartilage. In the trachea, there's a big, basically, ring of cartilage is what they call it. So that's what that is. But then if you get smaller and smaller, these large C-shaped rings start to disappear, and you get little cartilage plates occurring. Within these big airways, there are also mucus glands, which we can colour down here, and these are below the cells. And these just help secrete even more mucus, and those would secrete out even more, because up here it's really important to get everything out of the airways. And another important feature are these cilia at the top, which we know help beat this mucus and all the contaminants out of the lung. So that's the main parts of these big airways. Oh, but there's also a little bit of smooth muscle. It's not as big of a feature though, because these airways have these cartilage plates which help keep it open, but there is smooth muscle in there just for completeness. Now with a bronchiole, it's the same kind of feature. Start with that columnar, and you can also go down to these cuboidal simple epithelium. These also have cilia. But now that we're down here, we have different kind of mucus secreting cells. We don't have these thick goblet cells or mucus glands. We have these club cells which secrete a more watery fluid. So if you could imagine, it wouldn't be very good to have heaps of glunky mucus down this far in the airways. That's why you have these club cells. And these bronchioles also have a lot more smooth muscle. So it's like a thick layer compared to the lumen. So you could imagine it like a arteriole, lots of smooth muscle for the lumen size. And that's what allows the bronchiole size to change so much. So it could squeeze in if you wanted the air to move faster. If you were relaxed, you can dilate those airways. And that's the main features of these ones. So if you notice, there are no cartilage plates of any type, big or small, in these bronchiole, and that's because you don't need these airways to be open all the time. These airways need to be able to change their size, whereas these ones, you need to keep them open, because say this was like your bronchi or your main bronchus coming off, if that didn't have cartilage in it, it would collapse if you tried to breathe in, and that would be bad because this whole lung basically would be blocked off. So that's why these bigger airways have cartilage, but these ones don't. Now finally, we'll go down to the alveoli. The first type is a squamous pneumocyte, also called them type 1 alveolar cells. And these are those really flat cells, and they're what make up most of the alveoli. If you do a little nucleus there, it's really thin and it makes up most of that area. Then we have this type 2 cell in here, or the surfactant secreting cell, and that's a bit bigger, cuboidal. If you can imagine, it's trying to secrete heaps of liquids. It can't really be that thin because it has to have all this area to squirt stuff out. So you have this big one, and then most of it would be these type 1 pneumocytes. And then roaming around would also be these alveolar macrophage. So it would kill off anything else that randomly got in there. So if it was like a dust particle, it would come and eat it up so that it wouldn't get into your airways. So these surfactant cells secrete surfactant, which lines the airways, and it makes breathing easier. One of the clinical applications are babies that are born too early. They don't have these cells, so it's really hard for them to breathe. That's why sometimes, or most of the time, they squirt surfactant into their lungs so that they could breathe easier. And then these cells, they have to be really thin to allow gas exchange to occur. If something bad like fibrosis was to occur and these walls would get thick, it would be harder for gas exchange to occur. You can also imagine that there are heaps of basically capillaries floating by with red blood cells in them, and that allows for gas exchange to occur and for oxygen to get in and CO2 to get out, and that can go out to the body. Okay, now let's recap everything. You have these trachea / bronchi, and their main features are these cartilage plates. So I'll put a star next to the stuff that's important. I'll do it. So main feature, cartilage. And why is there cartilage? To keep the airways open, because you need air to get in, and if they were to close off, then you couldn't breathe, and that would be bad because no gas exchange would occur. So main thing, cartilage, also these mucus glands. So not just as goblet cells, but the actual glands themselves. Mucus gland. There's also goblet cells, which secrete a thicker mucus. That's the main things here. There's also a little bit of smooth muscle, but that's not the main thing. Main thing is smooth muscle in the bronchiole. So if you put a star next to the important stuff, you have smooth muscle, big one, because it's what allows for the change in airflow. So that kind of links into the parasympathetic and sympathetic activity. You could dilate and that would let more air in, or if you were at rest, you could constrict them, and that way you don't need to waste too much energy on getting air in and out of the lungs. You also have the club cells, which have a watery secretion, which is good down in the airways because you don't need heaps of mucus glugging it up. And then we move on to the alveoli. The main things are the type 1 and 2 alveolar cells, and then these macrophages, which will eat everything up. So it's just 3 main things. So what I find easy with the microanatomy is you just need to find the main points for each of the different areas. You could imagine everything in itself, but everything's kind of the same. They just have certain things that change things up, and then alveoli are their own category since they're where respiration occurs.